Unknown to you, an all-Africa war is looming. It would hurt Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Global South vision. A few days ago, his warmth with France and its leader Emmanuel Macron was visible. Now, this very France could spell trouble for India big time. As they say, it's time to smell the coffee. Welcome to yet another edition of WiseHeads. I am your host Ashish Shukla. Today we will talk about France and Africa. This France has an army right in the capital of an African nation, Niger. It's refusing to pull out of Niger even though its new government wants them to do so. France tells Niger that you are a military takeover and not a constitutionally elected government, and hence we won't pull out our army. It also warns Niger that if you try to forcibly remove French army or harm France's interest, France would rip you apart. Now, why France is refusing to pull out its army from Niger, of all places, the world's third most impoverished nation? Military government or a junta can't be a reason, for France has duly pulled out its army from neighboring Mali and Burkina Faso, which also have military governments. And did Paris have any problem with our own neighbor Pakistan when it was under a military dictator? Well, the reason is something else. You see, Niger is one of the 29 African countries which were once under France's thumb as its colonies. France gave them independence in the 1960s but refused to let these nations live in peace. France forced these countries to sign a cooperation pact implying that most of them would use its currency franc, that Paris would have the first right of refusal in case of newly discovered mineral deposits, and that France would have a preferential treatment when contracts are awarded in the ex-colonies. That's not all. These unfortunate African countries were made to transfer their colonial debt to Paris every year, much like the Bollywood flick Lagan. This colonial debt paid to France in return for the infrastructure they built is so humongous it will blow your mind. It's 440 billion euros every year. The biggest bleed Africans suffer is because of France's colonial currency franc, even though France itself today uses euro. Now, franc is used in 14 African nations which were once France's colonies. This franc has been cleverly pegged to euro. The Cooperation Pact forced these 14 African nations to serve some 85% of their reserve currency in French central bank. I repeat, 85% of their currency in French central bank treasury. These unfortunate countries thus do not have access to their own money. This money is under the direct control of the French treasury. So in order to make up for the shortfall for the day-to-day running of the country, these nations have to borrow their own money on market rate from Paris. There have been instances when these countries have revolted against the French operation, but they have paid a very, very heavy price for showing spine. These patriot rulers were either replaced by an uprising within or were assassinated. So it happened to President of Togo, Sylvanus Olympio. He refused to pay the colonial debt to France. In addition, he declared to abolish the colonial currency franc and print his own national currency. 3 days later, Olympio was overthrown in an uprising and was killed. The same was the fate of the first president of the Central African Republic, David Dacko, or president of Burkina Faso, Maurice Yemaogo, and of Benin, Mathieu Keriokol, and of Mali, Modiba Kelucho. In most of these cases, the trigger was these nationalist leaders' decision to abolish franc. But France wouldn't let that happen. It would shock you to know that in the last 50 years, a total of 67 coups took place in 26 countries, and that 16 of these 26 countries were former colonies of France. Why France wouldn't let go of these countries? The truth is, France without the loot from Africa would be world's 30th biggest economy and not the 7th. Its own former president, François Mitterrand, once said that without Africa, France would have no 21st century. In 2008, French President Jacques Chirac once said, without Africa, France would slip into the rank of a third world country. 1 in 3 bulbs in France are lit through Niger's uranium, which it needs for its power plants. There are multiple ways through which France intervenes in these hapless countries. France either intervenes directly with its military, or they create and fund groups which cause anarchy in the country. They also use terrorists to hold these African nations by the neck. These terrorists are either brought from outside, who bolster their ranks with the restive youth within a country's fold. These terrorists are branded as freedom fighters by the Western media. This media is nothing but forward agents of colonialists. These interventions, by the way, are the last resort of France. They most rely on rebels within a country who look like locals but are bred, taught, and are French in all breath appearances. These elites are called Francafrique, the local rulers who have a pact with France to loot an African nation and share the spoils. These Francafrique dominate Ecowas, or Economic Community of West African States. Ecowas is a group of nations in West Africa in which Nigeria is the most important because of its financial and military strength. This Ecowas is controlled by the West, in which France and the United States are important components. Now, Ecowas is threatening to invade Niger. On the other hand, Niger, along with Mali and Burkina Faso, are ready to take on the Ecowas. This face-off has the potential to develop into an all-Africa war. For France won't let go on the loot of Niger, nor would the United States, which has its biggest drone based in Agadez, a city in Niger. US won't lose one of its 29 military bases in Africa just like that. Against them, there is all likelihood that Algeria would come out in support of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. Adding twist to this intrigue is the reality that Algeria and Russia are like brothers to each other for decades. Algeria's military is almost entirely made up of Russian support. Russia's Wagner Group is also active in West Africa and Sahel region. So you could see what is at stake and how this could spin out of control. At stake is France's own survival and well-being, and the US, which doesn't want to cede the space. Russia too won't let the West have a free ride in West Africa. In a sense, it's more than just a Cold War unfolding in Africa. It has the potential to become a World War III and certainly an all-Africa war. Now, how does India look at this developing crisis? India's foreign policy presently looks at Global South, which largely means Africa, as an important component of its world vision. The world at the moment is split between the United States and China. India doesn't want to limit its foreign policy as a choice between these two superpowers. India wants to be neutral and independent in its global outlook, where the only interest which matters is Indian interest. India looks to be a key player in the third vector of the global geopolitics, where Russia, India, and the Global South could be an alternative to any nation which doesn't want to be caught in the crossfire between the United States and China. The Modi government, thus in recent years, has made some intense moves in the minds and hearts of African brothers. It offers all kinds of technological, economic, food, energy, infrastructure support to African nations, including lines of credit. It can't do much in the present crisis in Niger, but New Delhi would like colonialists to become insignificant in affairs of Africa. As long as the colonialists like France dominate Africa, India's bid to be a significant player in Global South would depend on the sweet will of the West. In an instant, colonialists like France could create anarchy or infest the region with terrorists to bring India's years of labors to a knot. like it happened in Afghanistan when on one fine day the United States pulled out of Kabul and India's investment and interest went up in smoke. So the near future would test New Delhi enormously. And that's why I say the bonhomie you see in media between the two leaders of India and France is like sleeping with the enemy. France needs India's market and India its sophisticated arms, but it's not to say the two share a similar worldview. Indeed, both India and France could be at opposite ends when it comes to Niger or, for that matter, Africa. As they say, it's a wild jungle out there where friends could be foes and foes could be your friends one fine day. This friend-foe binary at the moment is eluding both New Delhi and Beijing, where they are choosing to be foes when both are best served to be friends. That's all in today's edition of WiseHeads. I'm your host Ashish Shukla, who now takes your leave. Keep watching, liking and subscribing WiseHeads, for it's an antidote to mainstream media which never tells you the truth. Goodbye and good luck.